So history is basically
That's
just
huge.
cited 6 examples or 5 examples.
They'll take a handful of examples.
They'll take a few of the founding fathers.
Basically, we have learned to recognize the least religious, or at least those founding fathers where you can raise a question about their faith.
Right.
And so we'll raise, why is it that everyone loves to use James Madison? Well, James Madison they now call as one of the great founding fathers. That's because one of the very last things he did before he died was he came out with a writing called the Detached Memoranda. In that writing called the Detached Memoranda, he said, I know that I was on the committee that appointed the original chaplains for Congress, and we paid those chaplains. I now think that was a mistake. I don't think we should have had chaplains. He says, I know I issued a bunch of religious proclamations while I was president, calling the nation to days of prayer and fasting and prayer and thanksgiving. I now think that was a mistake. I shouldn't have had any days of prayer. So what happens is Madison's now a good guy in the secular mindset because he's got this detached memoranda that he wrote late in life where he renounced all of his religious activities. So you go his whole life, he's very outspoken, he's very religious, he promotes religion, he does treaties promoting religion, and into life he says, I think I made a mistake on everything. So we'll learn about Madison. Now, we're not going to learn about people like John Quincy Adams. We're not going to learn about what Jefferson actually did because we've got a couple of his phrases where we can say he didn't like religion.
Right.
So we're not going to look at the fact that in 1803, Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, signer of the Declaration, did a treaty with the Kaskaskia Indians where that he gave federal funds to send missionaries to the Indians, ratified by the U.S. Senate. Now, I don't know anybody on the radical religious right that would be comfortable with doing that today, but Thomas Jefferson did. It was not a problem for him. So we look at the guys today and we look only at what appears to be their non-religious or anti-religious side, and we think that's who they are. And you look at the rest of Jefferson, and he would make most Christians today look embarrassingly shallow. And yet Jefferson still had questions about the divinity of Christ and is still so much further in promoting Christian principles than that. But it's not just Jefferson, it's the other guys we don't talk about.
In the classroom.
Are we on? All right, you can turn on the light. Okay, so very, very interesting. And we want to kind of focus on that here this morning. And so you heard David Barton talking about how oftentimes the things that people know about the founding of America, the particular forefathers, and he highlights Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson as being perhaps the least religious of those that were involved in the founding of America. And yet, when you hear the things that they said and the positions that they took, they would be today considered very religious or very spiritual or very Christian. Today, they would be denigrated for that, and instead, we hear that they said these things that are critical, and they didn't agree with everything. I've read books about each of these men. And I'll be personally honest with you, when I read Ben Franklin's biography, I didn't particularly like him. He was a genius, but I didn't particularly like him. But that being said, how he lived life and how he viewed life was far more with a deep respect and deep understanding of Christianity. One of my favorite stories about Ben Franklin is he had been powerfully inspired by ministry and the First Great Awakening as it began to spread across America. And he went to a revival meeting and told somebody that he was going to bring just a small, he knew there'd be an offering taken and that he would just give, a small amount. And he was so moved by what happened in that crusade that he ended up giving his watch and everything, moved by what God was doing. And so so we want to talk about this here for a minute because this is very, very important. So as I said, America's 250-year anniversary is next year. And so not long after the Declaration of Independence was the establishing of the Constitution. The war ended around 1782. It took about 5 years for them to come up with the Constitution, and then after the Constitution, then the Bill of Rights that came across. And so we've had our Constitution now I'm doing the math in my head. If you were to say 1787 to now, to almost 240 years or so. You know the average age of a constitution in the world today? The average age, anybody care to guess? The average age of a constitution in the world today is 17 years. Countries write constitutions, change of power, revolution, whatever, and they will establish a constitution. 17 years. Our constitution is nearly 240 years old. Constitution is the rule book. It's how we operate as a country. It's the rule. If we've just finished the last week of June. Every year, the last week of June is when the Supreme Court issues most of its rulings. There were huge rulings that took place this past week. One of them was that in the state of Maryland, where they were putting homosexual and transgender issues into the curriculum as early as kindergarten. And parents who said, no, we don't want our children to be taught this type of material. All we're asking is that when you teach it, our children will be excused. And the state of Maryland said, no, you can't. Your kids have to be in these classes if they're going to attend public school. And so these people fought for years. Finally, their case, it took years to go through all the court system. They got to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled on behalf of the parents and said, no, the state doesn't have a right to educate your children about these issues without your permission. Huge, huge thing. That happened this week. You might not have been, but I tell you, if you had a 5-year-old kid in kindergarten, you would be paying attention to it. And so this is because of the Constitution. This is because there's a rule book that we have chosen to live by, and it has survived all these years. Let me give you a quote from Thomas Jefferson. He said, the example of changing a constitution by assembling the wise men of the state instead of assembling armies will be worth as much to the world as former examples as we've been given them. The Constitution is unquestionably the wisest ever yet presented to men. Now, he said this back in 240 years ago. And he wasn't one of the men who was involved with the Constitution. It wasn't his role. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, but the Constitution was largely the influence of other men. And yet he is saying something here that, this is going to endure. This is going to last in a way that we see everywhere else in the world has not been able to last. That God had put his hand on these men. And so I want to just make a couple of statements here. Number one is that God uses men to set about his purposes. God uses men. And if you go back and you take time to read about the establishing of our country, you're going to find that these men play the choices they made, the ability to do what they did. We are enjoying the influence of that all these years later. Let me give you a couple of scriptures here. Matthew 23:29. Matthew 23:29. Miguel Luna, if you'll get that. I need Isaiah 57:1. Isaiah 57:1. Ben. And one more over here, Adon, you get Proverbs 13:22. So God uses men, and that's a tremendous privilege, but how many know the problem is that men are not perfect? That men have failures and flaws. And so this has always been the mystery, is God uses human agency, that if he's going to move through men. And yet when people want to destroy the message, what do? They attack the messenger. And then they point and say, well, these men were flawed, or this thing has happened. We heard for the last few years the idea that, well, America was not free because there were still slaves, and look what happened to the Indians, and pointing out all the failures of mankind, rather than stepping back and saying, what a miracle that God took flawed men and used them to set about a much larger purpose and see things in a different way. Matthew 23:29.
tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous.
That's Matthew 23:39.
Oh, 20, I'm sorry.
See, there you go. Woe to you hypocrites. Okay. There's the flawed men right there. Let's get to the good part. All right.
39. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
You shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This is a powerful, powerful statement. And if you were, to read the larger text there, he begins to talk about some of the prophets who were killed for bringing God's message to the people. And Jesus is identifying with them, and he is saying something. If you want to see God, you have to be able to see God in men. That's what he's saying. He said, you're going to have to see God in men. You're not going to see me until you understand that God uses men. You're going to be blind. You will miss God if you choose to miss men. Yeah, we all know people out there that say, I love God, I've arranged it with Jesus, but I'm not going to a church because of the people, because of the preacher, because of humanity. And why? Because everybody's flawed. And so they say that, but they don't understand. When you close yourself off to men, you close yourself off to God. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be a Christian. I had an imperfect 19-year-old brother who got powerfully saved, and I saw his change. I got witnessed to. I went to a church, and they were surrounded by all these imperfect people, but God was there. And so the idea that what's happened is people want to dismantle America by pointing out the hypocrites. Now, I don't think it's fair to ask people in 2025 to judge somebody who lived 250 years before and say, well, how could you have tolerated slavery? Well, how do you tolerate abortion? Because it's so easy then to remove ourselves from obligation. If we say, if I can find a flaw in this person or in these men, these people, then that somehow now lifts the obligation on me to do what is right. I never thought I would say this, but when I became a pastor back in 1983, people still held in high regard pastors. That there was something respectful about the office of being a pastor. People that were not necessarily even religious, they respect. That's not true anymore. There's been so much damage, so much hypocrisy and all that people today just write the whole thing off. In England, less than 5% of the white population of England goes to church. Less than 5%. That there is a mindset now that says, you know what, this is man-made, this is all about men are imperfect, I'm not going. Last year, right around this time, there in the Metroplex there, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, 5 prominent ministers had to step down from ministry, and many people said, I'm never going to church. I'm not going to go there. I'm not, they're all like that. A healthy Christian has a deep appreciation for God's people. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I want to tell you that a right attitude towards those that God uses is necessary if you're going to learn. You cannot grow and learn if you have an attitude towards the instruments that God is trying to use. From time to time in my travels, people will approach me and they're aggrieved about something in their church or their pastor, and they want to talk to me, and I always tell them that this is God's instrument in your life. If you reject that, you're closing yourself off. You're limiting yourself. See, if you want to destroy an institution, then you must destroy the men who built the institution. Heroes have to be erased. They have to be canceled. If you were to sit down and say, okay, how would I want to dismantle this? How would I break this down? You would examine it and you would say, it's not the structure, it's not the buildings. If I wanted to break this down, I would have to break it down by dismantling the people who built it. If I could break them down, if I could cause people to say, well, you don't understand. Yeah, that's what they told you. That's the Disney version. But here's the real truth. These men were this and that, and we found this letter and this story. And you talk to many, many people, and you talk about America and its founding, and oh, yeah, they're a bunch of racists. These guys, yeah, they were that. Did you know Thomas Jefferson, he was this way. And Thomas Jefferson, the separation of church and state. How many here have ever been told, hey, separation of church and state? All because of one letter Thomas Jefferson wrote actually defending Christianity, but he used the term basically to say the state needs to stay out of the church and let the church be the church. But and today, church and state, we're out on Fiesta, church and state. Well, out there, it's not church and state, it's church and Budweiser. This is especially true today. I got a few pictures I want to show you this morning. If you don't believe that people believe that denigrating those who played an important role of why we are here, look at these pictures. And so put up one of them. That's Christopher Columbus. Stop celebrating genocide. Christopher Columbus is the one who in 1492 sailed the ocean blue and led those 3 tiny ships. I remember years ago being in Corpus Christi. Marcus was small, and I'd gone to preach there in Kingsville, and then we took a drive to Corpus, and they had the actual replicas of the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria right there moored, and you could go, and I'm looking at these tiny little boats, these 3 boats that sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean and traveled where no man had ever gone before. And these little boats came across the Americas and changed the world. The most significant human event other than the crucifixion of Jesus. Opened up the world. The gospel came. You and I are saved this morning. Many of us, our entire lives could be traced back to that particular little funnel of those 3 little boats. And today, genocide. Next picture. There's Thomas Jefferson. I'm sorry. That's Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, the guy that wrote the Declaration of Independence at the age of 33. And they're removing him, taking him down. Why? Well, because Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. And so that's it. Cancel him. Move him. You want to dismantle something, you dismantle the people who built it. And so a person in 2025 or 2020, when this happened in 2020, they said, no, we can't, no, he's done. Because our sensibilities today, the truth is people that are like this, that are so into pop culture in 2025, believe me, if they lived in 1800, they are the kind of people given to whatever was going on. But here they are, big truck, put the ties around them and remove Thomas Jefferson. Third picture. Abraham Lincoln. That's Abraham Lincoln. This is the guy that led America at its lowest point in the Civil War. Lincoln freed the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation. Torn down. Denigrated. Because if you wanted to destroy an institution, you just got to destroy the ones who built the institution. Lincoln took a bullet in the head. day he became president, the South declared we didn't want to be part of the Union, and over a period of months, everybody pulled out. He managed the entire Civil War. Finally, the South surrenders, America is reunited, and just a few days later, he's shot in the head. Tear his statue down. Okay, you know what? Here we are running out of time. All right, let me stop right here. Let's open it up. Anybody have anything? I see Pete. And one more brief, Pete.
I was a kindergarten teacher, elementary school, middle school, high school, and all throughout, all of this elimination of church and state was ever pointed out. It didn't matter how you sought to bring it in, it was always discouraged. And I was always asking myself the question, why? I mean, aren't we supposed to be about educating historically? And the bigger question was, yeah, but from whose point of view? And that started me thinking about, well, what religious freedom were we fighting for? It turns out that some of the religious freedoms were witchcraft. They were given the right in the New England states to practice witchcraft. So a lot of that had a lot to do with the separation of church and state, because they didn't want to really inflict all of that other diversity into, the consciousness.
Yeah, there was a story a couple of years ago, you may remember, I think it was in Iowa, of all places, Iowa. I've never been, I've only driven through Iowa, but saw a lot of corn. But, they in a public display where they had a Christian, or I don't know if it's Christmas, a Christian emblem, but somebody set up a satanic altar under the guise of equal expression for religion. And some Marine went through there and couldn't take it. He tore it down and became a hero, but they arrested him. I'm not sure how that all came about. Light and darkness, you got to know the difference. Beto.
Yeah, it seems like the devil is a master of putting a spin to things. And I mean, in the Garden of Eve, he put a spin on what God had said to Eve. He said, no, he didn't say that. He said this. And then we see here in the video how these authors put a spin on separation of church and state. That, really it says that the government should respect. And if you want to help, by all means, help religion. But never stop it. And yet there's a spin there. And I was listening to Secretary Hexbeth. He was talking to the press in charge of the Pentagon, and he said how the press is always putting a spin to what our president is trying to achieve. The nuclear sites were not all destroyed. There's still danger, and the pilots didn't do a good job, and yes, they dropped some bombs, but it didn't finish it. And so the devil is still at work in our nation against our government.
Are you trying to say the devil's in the media?
Yeah, definitely, for years.
Shocking.
Yeah, and so, he never stops. Yeah. And he also might put a spin into what the pastor is preaching about and members in our minds if we're not careful. Yeah. And so he's always trying to put a spin. We can go home and something can trouble us, and our mind is spinning, going crazy because we overthinking and overreading or overdoing it, what we said. And so we have to, be cautious of that.
So this is why I want to encourage you to come and be in Sunday school, because you want to know these things, because you have children, you have to counteract sometimes the things that are being taught and that are being told. And so it's very important that you say, okay, I need to know these things for myself and learn them. There are plenty of great resources, but this is what we're going to be doing in this Sunday school. We'll take a clip from some of this material, but we will examine that, and there's lots of things we'll talk about. And I highly encourage you to be a part of it. We're going to stop right now. We have a wedding in a few minutes. Lord bless you.